Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the Sick Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. And along with Alan, I'm Russ Laraway. One of my favorite parts of each episode is the sometimes fun, sometimes quirky, and sometimes serious side of the personal happenings in the life of Alan Stein. So before we get into an episode with a guy that has one of the best names on the planet, we'll get into that. What's been going on with you these past days, Alan?
Hey, Russ. I am super proud of my son, Jonah, who was motivated to find a summer job up here with my in-laws where I'm staying for the summer. Mm-hmm. And he went out, took his bike out, built his target list of companies where he wanted to work at, including Five Guys, including Trader Joe's, including some local bakeries. And he created a resume, got his name out there, he got interviews, and he starts his first job today.
Oh, very nice. And what line of work? Are we in baked goods? Are we in hamburgers? Where are we going?
He's working for a local inn for helping them out with catering events. So he's actually got to wear nice pants and nice shoes, and he has to get a tie. And I actually don't know if he knows how to put a tie on. I'm going to have to... I've put ties on him before, but now that he's going to work on his own, I don't know if he knows how to put a tie on. So I'm sure YouTube will help him if he doesn't get help from me.
YouTube is the place, but I will tell you the trick that I have had my whole life. So what I do is when I tie my tie, I keep it tied. I loosen it and I pull it out over my head and it stays tied.
That's some sick advice, Russ.
I was going to say that's a sick trick.
Yes, it is.
All right, so you're a little, from what I saw a little video, and it seems you're a little starstruck with the guest we have today. And without giving too much information, what can we expect from this episode with a guy that I said has one of the best names on the planet?
Yeah, so Russ Laraway was my great-grand boss at Google. He was my boss's boss's boss when I started at Google. And he was perhaps one of the biggest influences on my leadership style. I didn't even realize it until reading his book, that everything that I kind of learned and grokked onto during my time at Google really originated with Russ's thoughts and perspective.
All right. I'm very excited to hear what he has to say because I know that you have a lot of respect for him. So let's get into it with Russ Laraway.
You might be the most famous person I've had on as a guest here on the Sick Podcast. You're the
most famous host. You're the most famous host whose podcast I've been on. So that's pretty good.
Well, we got to get you out there more then. But Russ, I met about 12 years ago. He was my great-grand boss at Google. He was my boss's boss's boss, I believe, at Google. And I didn't really realize how inspirational Russ was to my career because a lot of his insights and focus on management permeated throughout that organization that I was part of at Google. And I learned a lot through that. I went from being a shitty manager to amazing manager because of a lot of the thoughts that Russ has. And now he has written a handbook, essentially, on how managers can go from ass clowns to amazing leaders. And
did you win? Thank you. Did you win Best Manager, by the way?
I did. I did win it.
What was your trip that year?
My trip was to Cabo, which was nice. Awesome. Although, you know how they have select leaders that come out there? I was really hoping Laszlo would come out there because he was kind of in my mind, he was the head of people ops at Google and he was the king of Google on the people side. But just Emmanuel came out and who I had access to before anyway. So it wasn't even That's special.
Not that big of a deal. Well, but still, I don't know, folks. I mean, a very small number of people win that award every year. And so since you would probably never mention that on your own podcast, as a fellow winner, I won it in 2011. As a fellow winner, the idea that you might have come in to the group, had some challenges, and we shined you up, and then next thing you know, you're winning Great Manager. Once a year, they give out a very small number of these awards to the best managers. And the way you get that award for your listeners is you have to first be nominated by your team. So if you're a jerk, you're never getting nominated. And then after that, you have to get ratified by a group of senior people. So if you have a reputation for being soft or being the kind of person who's just trying to win a popularity contest, you're still not going to win. And so it's for that reason, by the way, the reason I'm most proud of that award. And I think it's maybe not a bad idea for your listeners to know that you won a really, really hard to win award at a company, at a great company.
Yeah. Well, I thank you, Russ, and flattery will get you everywhere. And before you keep kissing my tush, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience, because I know you quite well. I've actually gotten to know you a lot better by listening to your book. But tell the sick audience about who you are, who you are, your background, and why it relates to people's careers. Yeah.
So I started my career as in the United States Marine Corps, kind of culminated there as a company commander, 175 combat Marines. Loved my time there, but had what most consider the best job in the Marines. And so I punched out after I did my 4 years. And then I founded a small company, supply chain consulting company. We did work for some large companies, though, like DuPont and Cardinal Health, and did that with some lifelong friends. And after about 5 years, we sold that. I went to the Wharton School, where I got an MBA. From Wharton, got recruited to go to Google. Spent 7 years there, had 3 different jobs. You and I intersected on my second major job there. And then after Google, scooted over to Twitter, which was really that was an incredibly difficult job for a really interesting company. From Twitter, I actually founded Candor Inc. with Kim Scott, who, she wrote Radical Candor. And she and I, were focused on helping people have great relationships at work. We actually tried to make a product. We failed miserably at that, but along the way, accidentally created a pretty nice little training and consulting business. And so did that for a couple of years. And then after that, I scooted over to Qualtrics, where Jared Smith, who he and I had reported to Kim at Google in my first job at Google. He was the founder of Qualtrics. Wanted a operator's take on HR. So my other jobs at Google and Twitter had been all go-to-market oriented. I've had quota, I've had marketing, I've had customer success. As you know, that's where we work together. And he wanted an operator's spin on people, and especially fixing managers. And, they had 100 managers or so when I started. We added about 500 in my 4 years there, and they got measurably better, which is, a little bit of a teaser for the book. And super highly engaged employees there, delivering incredible results. In fact, the company just had its 6th straight revenue beat as a publicly held company. That's the employees who deliver those results, and the managers who create the circumstances for them to do great work and be totally psyched while doing it. So, I got a family. I have 3 sons. I got two college-age sons and a high school senior. Live here in Alpine, Utah. I moved here 4 years ago from the Bay Area. 13 years in the Bay Area is more than enough, and just trying to live the dream. How's that? Is that is that what you're looking for, or a little too much, a little too little?
That's a great recap, Russ. So you have honed and developed this manager playbook or framework that I believe you call it the big 3 equal like EC or something, or ER. You explain it better. I know what the 3 inputs are that result with the 2 outputs, but I forget exactly how you phrase it. So talk a little bit about that framework that you've developed over the course of time.
Yeah, the model's called 3ER, which means the big 3, which I think we're going to get into here. Those are 3 broad sets of leadership behaviors that lead to more engaged employees and better business results. And I think probably most important is each of those 3 terms, the big 3, employee engagement and business results, they're all measurable. And so another way to say that is that the big three measurably and predictably leads to more engaged employees and better business results. And if you think about leadership as broadly as possible, that's all it's supposed to do. I don't care what context you're in. I don't care if you're in a church or government or a school. I don't care if you're in tech or finance. In the end, leadership is about leading people toward an outcome, ideally, happily. And so the 3ER model is really about how you lead to get sustainable results and keeping folks happy along the way. Because just remember, Alan, like the narrative version is people just want to do great work and be totally psyched while doing it. That's it. That's the whole game. And it is the manager, more than any other factor, by a mile, that is most likely to create or destroy those circumstances. And I defend all of these points pretty strongly in the book, as you know. And with math and with research, third party, first party, all of it. But that's the basic idea. Happy results. People just want to do great work and be totally psyched while doing it.
And outside of the data, and I love the fact that you use a lot of data in the book to support your hypothesis. I've seen this in action. I've experienced it, but tell the audience here what those big three are.
Yeah, they're direction, coaching, and career. That's the big three. And so the big three, direction, coaching, and career, they break down into about 12 distinct leadership behaviors, specific observable behaviors. It's really an important idea. And so just gets a little too weedy for us to get into all those details in a podcast. I'll go through a couple of the behaviors probably later. If we talk a little bit about advice, I'll have some advice for folks that lines up with some of the leadership behaviors. But 3 broad sets of behaviors. We broke them down into 12 actually behaviors. And we actually asked employees every quarter during my 4 years there.
This was at Qualtrics, right?
Yeah, sorry, at Qualtrics. Apologies. Yeah. We asked employees if their managers were showing these behaviors. And then that allowed us to measure the frequency with which the managers were showing behaviors. And so we called that the manager effectiveness score. So I'll use those 3 things interchangeably, Alan. So the 12 leadership behaviors, or the big 3, or manager effectiveness. And that was a measurement. So you as a manager might get a score that's like 85%. That basically means your employees said 85% of the time they chose the top 2 boxes on a 5-point scale around 12 different leadership behaviors. And the reason that's so important is because once you start measuring whether managers are demonstrating leadership behaviors, now you have the ability to drop that into like a statistical package and determine whether those behaviors have a relationship with a quantitative relationship with each of employee engagement, which itself is measurable, and business results, which obviously, like in the case of a sales organization or customer success organization, those are highly measurable outcomes. And so, one of the things I'm fond of saying is the world doesn't need another person's opinion about what it takes to be a great manager. In fact, I'm going to argue that the giant pile of people's opinions is not actually making managers better. And I have evidence for this. So if I may for a sec, I have this little fantasy that I'm going to get every author of a management book. I'm going to sit them down individually, and I'm going to ask them, how do you think your stuff helps? Right? How do you think your stuff helps the average manager to be better? And they might say something like the manager's going through like an a la carte buffet style lunch line, and they pull a little off the Simon section, or they pull a little off the Liz section, or a little off the Kim section, maybe even these days a little off the Russ section. And then, they go with a delicious, healthy meal that's a metaphor for sort of a leadership toolkit. The problem, though, is that I don't think for the average manager it feels at all like a leisurely trip through a buffet-style lunch line. I think instead it feels like you're hogtied in the center of a middle school cafeteria while there's a multi-thousand-person food fight transpiring, right? So like broccoli bouncing off your head, mashed potatoes sliding down your cheek. And one of the big problems is managers tend to opt into, and when there's too much stuff and it doesn't hang together, which is true of the current corpus of information. By the way, also true of the current corpus of information is not one leadership prescription holds itself to any version of measurable account, let alone what I think it should be, which is, are employees happier and do they get better results? So then you've got a problem where managers are opting in based on bias. So they choose things to pay attention to that already line up with their worldview. Those may or may not be the right things, actually. Or they choose things that they're already kind of good at. Those may or may not be the right things to focus on at this time, versus a really small number of high leverage behaviors that we know drive better outcomes, that we know for a fact drive better outcomes. So that's the problem. The center of the model is employee engagement. So remember, your question was 3ER. Employee engagement is a 30-year-old measurement out of the field of IO psychology. So it's not like what Russ thinks engagement is, what Alan thinks engagement. It's actually a pretty well-developed measurement, and it strongly correlates with business outcomes. And so I run a bunch of stats in the book. So Bain and Company found that highly engaged employees, grow revenue 2.5 times faster than lesser engaged. Right? There's a million of them in there. And so the idea is to lead through engagement. Engagement's the center of the model. And here's the big kicker. The manager explains 70% of engagement, 70. What that means is in very large data sets, when you observe a variance in employee engagement, 70% of that variance is statistically and uniquely explained by commensurate variance in manager quality, both positive and negative. And so, in other words, better management, more engaged employees. More engaged employees deliver better results. And that's how the model all works together. So if the manager explains 70% of engagement, and if I told you global engagement is 15%, and I shouldn't have to tell you that's out of 100 because that's what percent means. And by the way, in the US, it's 33. Like, it's 2 times better, but it's still, by any academic standards, an F. It's pretty clear managers are failing. And actually, even though everyone's trying, no one is helping. And so in the end, I think people deserve to be led well. And it's clear they're not being led well systematically at scale in the US or globally. And I thought it was time to try to cut through the muck and find this really small number of very high leverage. And by the way, the 12 behaviors themselves, they're not all created equal. Some have very strong relationships. I could stack rank them almost. They have very strong relationships with engagement and results, and others have weaker relationships, but they all have a relationship. And together, this creates a cohesive or coherent leadership standard, small number of behaviors, totally addressable. It's just direction, coaching, and career. I mean, that sounds simple, right? And simplicity is a feature, not a bug here. The world is conspiring to confuse the average manager with too much complexity. I thought it was my job to simplify it.
That's awesome, data backed, exactly how I knew you during my Google days. And your formula makes intuitive sense as well. So if a manager is to provide direction, if they are to provide coaching, if they are to care about one's career, you will get engaged employees that deliver good business results. Makes total sense. And then you talk about the engagement that we have between 15 and 33%. I think 15% was global, 33% US. So then my conclusion, and I've seen this also, you're not getting either the direction, the coaching, or the career up front that's yielding those poor results. Where do you, of those three, is there one that you think is the biggest contribution and the biggest one that's lacking to deliver on those piss poor results of engagement?
Yeah, it's probably coaching. If you force me to pick one, here's the thing, though. I just want to caution folks. Cherry picking out of this book is a mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay to start somewhere, and I'm happy to talk about some behaviors have much stronger leverage in the system than others. But it is designed to be a coherent system. So, for example, if I tell you that coaching tends to have a stronger relationship to coaching-oriented behaviors, a couple specific behaviors have very strong relationship with employee engagement. Well, what you're coaching on is sort of what you developed in direction setting, right? So direction is really about making sure, not kind of sure, not a little sure, but I mean, absolutely certain. People know what is expected of them and when it's expected by. And so your coaching is heavily a function of what you and your team came up with together for the team's direction. Just for example, so if you were to only focus on coaching and not use the 4-part direction framework that I outline in the book, or make sure every single person understands their exact portion of the aligned result we're all supposed to get, you run the risk of coaching them toward the wrong stuff. Yep. So expectations are critical. Let me give you an example. Most of us have the intuition we should coach people on behaviors, right? There's certain behaviors that we expect, certain behaviors we expect you to show, and certain behaviors we certainly would expect you not to show. Where do those behavioral standards come from? What are the actual behavioral expectations for someone? You get those expectations from perhaps core values. You get those expectations maybe from a respectful workplace policy, at the sort of low end of the spectrum. You might get those expectations from like one of these like career stage profiles. So in marketing, level 1 content or copywriters expected to do X, level 2 expected to do Y, level 3. The point is that without clarity on what's expected, whether it's a result that you're expected to deliver, a behavior or work product you're expected to deliver, or a behavior you're expected to show, it's hard to coach people relevantly. It's hard to coach people to standard if you're not crystal clear on the standards that are expected. So that's why I'm a little bit cautious. It is designed to be a coherent system, but 2 coaching behaviors specifically that have extremely high leverage, extremely strong relationship with employee engagement. One is, the question might be, how much do you agree with the following statement? My manager regularly gives me specific praise for good work. And so that one has the strongest relationship with employee engagement. And it's interesting that it's a powerful idea, actually. A lot of people think, entitled millennials, of course, they just want to get patted on the back. And, by the way, millennial stereotypes are as bad as almost any other stereotype. There are employees, by the way, they're getting more and more senior these days. I think, I'm a little tired of hearing people complain, but the reality is that it's continue coaching. So you're making explicit for people what's working, both behaviors and work products. A phrase you could use is, do you know what I love about how you de-escalated that customer issue? Do you know what I love about how you ran that customer meeting in a sales context? Do you know what I love about the way you ran that sprint this week? Engineering sprint, not a running sprint. But although, hey, why not? You know what I love about the way you ran that sprint this week? I love the way you held just a little in reserve for the last 20 meters. And so you're telling people what to continue. But the big idea here is it forces you to be in tune with the standards, because the standard for good continue coaching is to be specific and sincere. And the reason I chose coaching is because it is different than cheerleading. Cheerleaders are on the sideline, right? They're like, yay, go team, you're doing great, hip hip. I don't know what they say, but they're not being specific. They're not even watching the game. They're watching us, right? And so how can they be specific? They're giving general praise, which is not useful. Coaches, on the other hand, give really specific stuff to continue and to improve. And so that's why I like the word coaching. And that's why the continue idea is so powerful, because you're teaching people what's working, giving them the best chance to repeat that, right? On top of that, how many times do you think, Alan, people in your audience go home and say to their partner or their dog or whoever's there, roommate, how many times do you think they go and say, my boss has no idea what I do? You think that happens a lot?
Way too often.
Yeah, I mean, it's tale as old as time. Like it's like Beauty and the
Especially with
Beast.
COVID, if you're not in front of them, people feel even more isolated.
Even more isolated, even more out of touch. Does a boss have any idea what I do? Well, guess what? Bosses who give specific and sincere praise or give frequent continue coaching. By the way, I recommend 5-to-1 continue to improve. I got that from the Positive Coaching Alliance, who themselves got it from a guy named John Gottman, who is one of the leading thinkers on marriage success, by the way. But anyway, 5-to-1. Those managers, because they're being specific about the standards, giving specific continue coaching, they're also, a byproduct of that is they are recognizing people. And the days of people saying, by the way, they always say it behind your back, my boss has no idea what I do, those days start to go away because now you're demonstrating that you do know. So what seems like this really simple idea, if I just say good job more, it's not at all what it's like that's total good job's the worst praise to give. It's non-specific. It comes off like a platitude and is not helpful at all. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about very specific praise. That's behavior one. Behavior two is actually asking for hard feedback as a manager. It turns out like nobody goes to work and is like, hey, you know what I'm hoping happens today? I'm hoping I'm not heard. That's just not how it is. And, managers, managers are leading a human system, a team. That means it's got flaws all over the place. And what's interesting, what I've learned over my career is that I'm blind to many of the flaws, but my team isn't. And when you learn how to ask for challenging input, right? It might be hard feedback about me, about my leadership, might be about just generally what we're doing on the team. It might be about how we're spending our budget. It might be how we're addressing opportunities in the marketplace. I don't care what it is. It turns out if you find a way to ask your team for that kind of input regularly, they'll give you the answers and the team will get better because your employee, sort of wisdom of the crowd idea. And so these two ideas, one, if you coach people to continue the things they're doing well, and by the way, you're not firing everybody on your team, which implies they're doing more well than poorly. Right. And if you actually learn how to ask for feedback that challenges what's going on every day, not, hey, tell me how great everything is. The opposite. Tell me what's messed up around here. And I give a prescription for how to do that safely. It turns out those teams where managers just do those two behaviors are incredibly strongly related with engagement, which, by the way, I think fits our intuition. And again, I have to remind people that's not just touchy-feely. It's not just like, oh, we're going to sing Kumbaya together around the guitar. Like, engaged employees are the ones. Employees deliver the results, not the manager, not the CEO. Employees do. And engaged employees deliver much better results than lesser engaged employees. An idea that I promise you is 30 years old, highly measurable, and well established.
Yeah. And I am so bought into the coaching. One of your I don't know if it was your direct report, but in the disciple of your leadership training and like leadership guidance, Anant was my manager. And I remember my performance reviews, he would give me a very detailed document of all the positives that I did. And there were definitely, and all the negatives. And I don't know if he called them negative, but AFDs, I think we called them at Google, areas for development. Yeah. Yeah. And I was always so impressed. I was like, holy cow, I didn't realize that he noticed all of this stuff and he was capturing it. And it gave me a lot of probably engagement and encouragement. I was like, oh, my boss is actually paying attention to what I do.
Yeah, it's great. And not was one of my directs. Really, he had a lot of opportunities when he joined us, and he came to our group because of the emphasis on people management. And that was something he wanted to become great at. And he invested heavily in trying to be a great manager. I spent a ton of time with him on that, because he came from like McKinsey and other backgrounds where they don't necessarily learn how to manage well. I think McKinsey's an incredible firm. That's just not necessarily the best managers I've ever seen. Yeah. And so, yeah, he was heavily focused on that. I think what I'd, while that was a positive experience, I think, the thing to bear in mind where we might have all gone wrong back in the day with semi-annual reviews, and still probably go wrong if we're doing semi-annual reviews today, is that another reason I chose the word coaching instead of feedback is because coaching is not something that can wait 6 months. I give this example of a gymnast. His name's Starks. It's my son who had been a competitive gym. At one point, he was the 70th best gymnast in the country at his age, right? And Starks was pretty good at the vault. And so I hope most people know the vault. That's in both men's and women's gymnastics. That's kind of why I use that one. And he was doing something called a kazamatsu, which is, I can't even describe it. You got to kind of watch some YouTube videos. And so Starks would have practice, let's say from 6 to 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night. It doesn't matter. 6 to 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night. And Starks does a repetition on the vault for a kaz or a kazamatsu. And so what this means is he runs a very specific distance down a blue mat. He hits a springboard, and then he hits the vault table and does an incomprehensible mixture of flips and twists and things in the air, lands on another blue mat, turns to his coach, and the coach says, you over-rotated in your twist. Something like that. Starks nods, runs back to the line and gets ready to do another one, ideally incorporating, rotating less in this next repetition. So that's how it works. Let's say that instead of giving Starks that coaching right there in that moment, let's say he waits for Starks' 6-month review. So it's July now. So in January, Coach Matt, whoever, says, Starks, remember that rep you did Tuesday night at 6 p.m. back in July? Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? Anyway, let's say instead of in the moment, though, he waits till Friday night, big performance wrap up, right? It was Tuesday. He waits till Friday. Any good? No, it's terrible. Like, Starks isn't going to remember that rep. By the way, he's done 100 reps in between then and now. Let's say he waits till the end of practice. So the rep was at 6 p.m. Let's say he waits till 9 p.m. Any good? No, still no good. All better than the previous, but still not good enough. And the insight is Stark's getting ready to go do another repetition right now, and he needs the coaching right away. And so there's an importance to giving coaching, more like brushing and flossing, and less like your semi-annual trip to get your teeth scraped, or maybe a root canal, if you don't do enough brushing and flossing. We've all been there. And so that's another reason I chose the word coaching. It's more energetic. It's more frequent. It tends to feel more in the moment. Any of us that have seen an athletic event or have been athletes, there's a real intuition there that coaching sort of always on instead of happening every 6 months. But all that aside, and not invested heavily in becoming a really good manager. And I'm sure if he listens to this, he'll be real happy to hear you say that. He doesn't care what I say. Good managers care a lot more about, do their teams think they were led well? And so to hear you say that, I think will mean a ton to him.
Yeah. He was one of my good managers that I've had in my career. And on that note, I've had 35 managers in my career. I actually keep a spreadsheet on that because that's how and this goes back to my first job when I worked at a grocery store as a 14-year-old, but I've tracked this, and I've had a lot of shitty managers. 9 out of the 35 I've deemed as assholes. And I rate them all at the end. I give them I actually did once, and I got in trouble by a former employer of making that spreadsheet public. So I did not do that. I actually just used initials, but you probably know some. So there are a lot of you wrote this fantastic book that gives people the things to do, and you break it down very specifically. And I've seen there it is. And I meant to bring the book here. Dang it. It's in the other house.
I got one.
Yeah. Okay. There is the book that I actually have on my bookshelf. I actually brought it up here, and I don't have it in this room. Sorry. But there are a lot of poor managers out there, and there are a lot of managers that are not held accountable by their leadership. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be poor, or they wouldn't continue to be poor. So for an individual that is dealing with a manager that is not delivering the big three, I'm someone who's tried, how does someone take ownership of that situation as the IC, as an individual contributor, or anyone? Like you said, almost everybody reports to the manager, even the CEO reports to the board of directors. So how does an individual take ownership of their situation if they're dealing with someone that is missing either the direction, the coaching, the career, and it's impacting their engagement and their results?
Yeah, really hard, by the way. Very, very easy. Maybe it'd be a little easy for us to sort of talk it through, but very, very hard to do. So if I may just take one small step back. I agree with you that managers are not held accountable. If you really think about it, the manager's manager is actually one of the least likely people to see how the manager is leading. It's the employees who see that the best. And so there's this model I put in at the end. You may not quite have gotten there yet. I'm not sure, but it's called STACK. It's an acronym. Select.
I read the whole book. I just don't remember all your acronyms yet.
Cool. So, all right, cool.
I read through the acknowledgements as well because I knew a lot of those people you were acknowledging.
Okay. All right. Cool. Sorry about that. Select, teach, assess, coach. And what that means is there's a through line through that acronym, which is one leadership standard that ideally, measurably and predictably leads to more engaged employees and better business results, like the one I wrote about. You select managers for leadership disposition, not because they were the best individual contributor, or like in the restaurant business, it's like, hey, you're still here. Okay, here's the keys. You're the manager. That's a terrible way to pick people to be a manager. Internal, external, you should choose for leadership disposition. I have a rubric on my website that you could use to do that right now, like www.whentheywinyouwin.com/tools, right there, leadership selection rubric. So select. Then you have to teach the manager what's expected of them, the leadership standard that's expected, ideally formally, and it should be the same leadership standard that you're selecting for. So select and teach are aligned. The third part of this is assess, and by far the most important part. This is one of the big ideas, and I wrote this for HR people in the back of the book. Managers can easily hide from their bosses. And they do it. That's why it's one of the reasons they're not, that we're failing. But you can never hide from your team. You could try. The problem is the team doesn't usually get a voice. And so I had this epiphany that it's the team that's delivering the results. It's the team that we're fighting to attract, develop, and retain. It's the team that's being led. And so as long as I don't write popularity contest questions, like, how much do you trust your manager? I don't like that question. It's common. I don't like it. I don't use it. How much do you trust your manager versus specific behavior? Are you observing your manager do these behaviors? It turns out this instantly flips the leadership culture in a company. Now managers are being held accountable for their leadership by the people that they're leading. That's who they serve. And so this actually, I can't believe most companies don't do this. It's not 360. Right. The manager's manager gets no say in it. The peers get no say in it. The team only.
Yep.
And these tools have confidentiality thresholds and things like that make it so the manager would have a hard time retaliating if they had that stupid instinct to do that. And I say this because of select, teach, assess, and then the last one's coach. So assess, coach, assess, coach, assess, coach. That's a cycle. Assess every quarter, coach when there's gaps, and there will be gaps. That puts accountability for how well the manager's leading into the hands of their team, and that's a big idea and really important. And good managers who want to be great, managers who don't want to hide, they love this. Managers who want to hide or managers who are fearful, managers who aren't willing to invest in becoming great, they fear this. So assess code. By the way, it's not assess term. That system will die. It's not stat. Right. It's stack.
You mean terminate?
Yeah. So some managers have big gaps. They think they're showing the behaviors. Their employees disagree. And you can't punish those managers for that. You got to just coach them to be better. Because if you start bouncing people, eventually you might. We had a guy at Qualtrics who just refused to change, 2 years. And he had some relationships that made it hard for us to get him out of there. Finally, those relationships structurally changed, and he got sidelined from being a manager because he just wouldn't improve. And his team was miserable. But generally speaking, what we're doing is we're identifying gaps, the team's showing us what the gaps are, and then we go help that manager be better. So it's just a systemic way for people to get the manager accountable. I even have a tool on my website for managers to ask their teams to give them a manager effectiveness score. So that's how you would do it structurally. But let's say you're in the moment, you're an individual contributor, or you have a manager, they're not delivering. I put a little 4-step process for teeing up hard feedback to you. I call it coaching the boss. It's actually a chapter called Coaching the Boss. And step 1 is account for your risk. And so what I say is if you work for a retaliator, then just polish up your resume and go get a different job. It's that end of process. Don't bother. The reality is most managers aren't retaliators. And so step 2 is really important, which is called gather your boss's unique context. Alan, I've been around long enough to know that everyone thinks they're right. So you think you have an opinion about what your boss is doing or not doing, and you think you're right. And you're not. You're not right. Or said differently, you don't possess the truth. Yep. There are really 4 truths around us at all times. There's my truth. There's my boss's truth, in this case. The best that she and I, my boss and I, can do is get to a shared truth. That's the 3rd one. And we probably never quite achieve the objective truth, like the universe's objective truth, not like in a business context. It's just hard to get there. I'm not even sure it exists. And so the reason step 2 is go gather your boss's unique context is because I want you to drive toward a shared truth. And you have to get your boss's truth in order to have that. You can't have a shared truth until you know both, yours and the boss's. So, and you got to go in saying, even though I think I'm right, I got to account for the idea that I'm not. And so you may learn a million things. You may learn your boss knows exactly what's going on with this thing and has chosen not to focus on it because it falls in as it's the 6th priority on a list of, and it can only focus on 3 priorities. Or you may learn your boss has no idea about it. And as you talk it through, you may realize maybe it's not as important as it seems. Or you may realize that your boss has no idea and you both agree it's important. Let's say the boss thinks they're showing certain behavior that's important to you and they're not. Well, now that's what you're after, right? Now that's the thing we're after. The other things we might say, hey, thanks, boss. I got what I need. End of process. So that's step 2, gather the boss's unique context. Step 3 is to ask permission. So let's say you've discovered in a shared truth a gap. It's something that matters. You and the boss are starting to kind of see that it matters. And maybe you have a little different opinion, though, about the degree of the infraction or the degree of the problem. Well, now you have to ask permission. Boss, I think I see things a little differently than you do on this. Do you mind if I share my perspective? This is basic. It's because you're the direct report and you're basically using caution. You're creating safety. And now you've asked permission to give a different opinion, right? You've done everything right. You made sure you're not working for a retaliator. And if you do, you polished up your resume. Then you gathered your boss's unique context. You actively listened. You didn't interrupt. You didn't argue. You didn't get defensive. You didn't get mad. You got curious. And then you move across and you ask permission. And I'm telling you, buddy, 99 times out of 100, the boss is going to say, yeah. By the way, 1 out of 100, go back to polish up your resume, go get a new boss. Your boss doesn't want to hear you out. That's just just leave. It's not worth it. But 99 times out of 100, maybe 999 out of 1,000, the boss will say, yeah, share. Well, now step 4 is Nike, just do it. And you got to share because now you have the opportunity to create shared truth. You have the opportunity to potentially make the entire team more successful. You have the opportunity to certainly make your manager more successful, which I think is part of our job is to make those around us more successful, including our boss, believe it or not. They're human too. They want to be successful as well. Only thing we all have in common at work is that we want to be successful. It's the only thing we all have in common at work. And so that's the 4-step process. Account for your risk, gather your boss's unique context, ask permission, and then once you get a yes, just do it. And you can start to get your manager to meet you halfway at least. And one of the things I say about the book for non-managers is it has 2 really major sources of value. One is every single manager in the world at one time was not a manager, right? So which means you may become one. You may be an aspiring manager, and this will help you become a good one quickly. And the second thing, though, is it helps you know what to expect from your manager. So now this idea of coaching the boss, well, it's important that you coach the boss on things that matter. And, we laid out measurably the leadership behaviors that matter here. And so rather than running the risk of being like the squeaky wheel who's asking for a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter, this can help focus you on the things you should really expect from the boss. And then you can coach the boss to try to go and get those things from him or her.
Yeah. I agree. Everybody wants to succeed at work, but everybody wants to I have found at least some managers that I've worked with, and you've probably seen them too, want to succeed in the eyes of their superior, the person that is evaluating them. So they manage a hell of a lot better up than they do down. They kiss up and they kick down. It's a common term because it happens way too often. I've been at companies, I've been at Google, Facebook, Salesforce, where they all did some semblance of manager feedback. Maybe not the same exact well-researched questions that you did, although they were probably pretty decent. And these surveys came back and you saw the results. I remember when I was in your org, I got a really crappy score. I was in the bottom 25th percentile, and you, I think, instituted a new manager integration. I was a new manager. It was an NMI, and you guys basically had intervention for me as a manager, and that really helped me to give me the feedback to help me to support. But you cared about that. There's so many leaders that don't care and see those poor results in their organization, and it comes down from the top. I think your advice is great in terms of seeing the two truths. And by the way, I love the 4 truths that you talk about. I talk about that with my wife all the time now. And I love those 4 truths that you talk about. I think your framework has not worked well for me. And it's probably because I haven't done enough digging of understanding maybe the other truth. But it's really hard for someone as a subordinate to take that proactive approach and do that. So how successful do you see that versus, not that I want people to jump ship right away, but often, like looking back on my 9 poor situations, I don't know, maybe I could have turned 2 of them around. I don't know if I could have turned all 9 of them around. So like, how do people evaluate early on and take proactive control of their career, understanding who they're reporting into and how that is impacting their engagement and their results as well?
Yeah, I like the idea that early is better than later, because you're going to get information on whether you're going to have success in coaching the boss. And not all bosses will take it on. Not all bosses will take it on well. There's just a lot of variables here. Here's the thing, Alan. If you zoom out and just don't focus on your own situation for a minute. If you zoom out, there's a couple realities here that we have to deal with. Reality number 1 is, statistically, if you leave this team because you think the grass is greener, the likelihood is it isn't. Statistically, you're likely to bounce from one bad manager to another. That's kind of number 1. Because most managers are bad. Global engagement's 15%. Sure. 33 in the U.S. managers are responsible for that. By the way, not only more than any other factor, all other factors combined are worth less than half of the manager. Yeah. Like, it's so powerful. So that's number 1. You think the grass is greener, maybe it is, but actually probably it isn't. That's number 1. Number 2 is, if you're getting to a point where you're planning to leave, right? You're in like last ditch effort. So a lot of times what I'll say to people who are in this spot where like, I just can't take it anymore, I'll say, hey, give it one last shot. Now you got nothing to leave because you're seriously considering leaving. You actually even have like interviews and stuff like that. Like, now you got nothing to lose. Give it a shot if you think you can make it work.
Yeah.
And so I guess what there's really an opportunity to try to figure out much earlier if you can change that system, and you may not be able to. And at least and at least you tried, and you tried over and over, and you tried a bunch of times. You tried early, you tried often. And now when you're getting ready to leave, at least this grass will never be green. And so even though going to another place, there's a probability the manager's not going to be spectacular, at least you've done as much diligence and put in every last bit of effort in this situation to determine the grass will never be green here. And so that's kind of how I think about it. You can't just keep running. I mean, by the way, ultimately, like, there was a word there. One of the major hiring criteria we used at Qualtrics was job hopping. One of the founders called it corporate tourism. And people, you wake up in the morning and you meet an asshole. You met an asshole. If all you do all day is meet assholes, you're the asshole. And so, people that everywhere they go, oh, these people are crazy. These people stink. My boss is, like, at some point, maybe it's you. And so you can't just bounce around either. That's not a good. So you got to figure out some way to try to make these situations better for yourself. You'll be happier. You'll do better work. and you won't maybe give up on a situation that actually is salvageable too early. So I think that's maybe how I'd sort of guide or coach folks to thinking about that stuff.
Yeah. So I have two last questions because we're wrapping up on time here, and it's been super engaging. And I got to go back and read your book again because I forgot some of the acronyms. I remember most, but I'm not an expert. I guess
it's all good, man.
But the two last questions I'd like to ask you is, what did your book offers so much advice and so much great guidance, but if there's one piece of sick advice you'd want to leave our listeners with who are trying to take proactive control of their career, could you boil something down to one good nugget?
Yeah. We didn't touch at all on the career section, which I maybe is a little ironic given what you do.
Yeah. That was actually my intent when I asked you those three, what were the most important? Because I thought you might have said career, because that was one of the most influential. I guess a few of the things. You were also good with the direction and the OKRs, but I think your career section was the longest part of the book of those three sections, or it seemed like it to me. Not because it dragged on, but I think you spent a lot of time on that. So sorry, I interrupted you as you were offering your sick advice.
You're good. It is the longest part for a couple of reasons. One is I was committed to not reiterating a bunch of stuff that other people already wrote. And so in direction and coaching, I tried to stick with new material, number one, also material that measurably and predictably led to better engagement and better results. Number one. But career is entirely original. It's my career conversations model that I've been refining for 15 years. And so it took up a bunch more space. That said, it has the supports growth and development as an idea is in the top three most correlated ideas with respect to employee engagement, and career is what that's all about. So it's extremely powerful. The one piece of advice I have for folks, the whole career conversations model pivots around establishing what is your long-term career vision. Mm-hmm. The idea here is, what's the dream job, not the next job. That we account for that in the short-term planning. But the advice I got from Sheryl Sandberg like 15 years ago now was you have to have a long-term vision and a short-term plan. And that's the essence of the model. And so one of the things I've learned over the years, having developed vision statements with 1,000 people, is once you get clarity with, and by the way, you can have a couple of it. You don't have to have one. We're not chiseling this on your headstone. You can have a few. You know, a lot of people are reluctant to do this work because, like, Russ, I don't even know what I want to be when I grow up. But it's bullshit. Everybody has a dream. And so what we're asking you to do is get in touch with that dream. Ideally, a manager and a report getting in touch, but that's not even necessary. You can do this with your friend at Starbucks. Get in touch with the dream and then bring it into focus. You know, and I put kind of 3 questions in there to bring the dream into focus. And it's not the 10-year plan or the 5-year. That's all old news. Just nail a dream, or a couple dreams is fine. Turn them into career vision statements by using the focusing questions we dropped in the book. And I promise you, this changes every short-term investment you make in your career. Mm-hmm. If someone comes to me and asks me for career advice, Alan, I cannot give them a shred of advice until I've facilitated them into a career vision statement, which I can do in a couple minutes now with most people. Otherwise, it's arbitrary. It's my projection, or it's kind of what I'm thinking, what I want, or what I think's good for them, instead of getting in tune with their dream. And here's the thing, man. Like, so many of us, you, in fact, you're dedicating your life, and one could argue, to helping people grow. I believe deeply in helping people grow. Mm-hmm. Where I think so many managers who have their heart in the right place, or people or content creator, it doesn't matter who, have their heart in the right place, but go a little wrong, is they never answer the question, grow into what? Yeah. And it's only with that context, in my opinion, that you can actually give relevant short-term career advice. So if everybody does one thing for themselves, it's take shower time, it's go develop the career vision statement. It is the hardest part of the model, and it is the most important, and nothing else is close to being as hard or as important. And it changes everything about how you make your short-term investments in because now it's always done. You see the lighthouse in the distance, and now I'm going to chart my path. I'm going to drop the flagstones along the path. Sometimes I got to cut the path. Sometimes I got to drop the flagstones. And I'm going to start working my way toward the long-term vision in a very proactive and intentional way. So that's my number one piece of advice. That's my piece of sick advice.
Yeah. Thanks, Russ. And I remember going through that process. I joined Google right after I think you had an offsite about leadership development, and Anand had the conversation with me about where I saw myself at the pinnacle of my career.
That's it.
And then I had those conversations with my directs, and it was extremely valuable. And I agree. That is one of the most sick pieces of advice. Identify where you're going to be at your peak, or
Boom.
At least where your vision is. Cool. And the very last question, you dropped so much great advice here. I've read your book, or I've listened to your book, because I don't read anymore because I'm a really slow reader, but I've listened to it. I listened to your voice. And yes, I had to listen to it at 1.2 speed because you were talking a little slow, as you told me that the author that they coached you on.
They made me do that.
Where can people find you and get more of Russ Laraway's wisdom?
Yeah, thanks. I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. www.whentheywinyouvin.com. We have tools. There's a media page with podcast appearances if you'd like to hear other ones. I'm easy to find on Twitter, on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. By the way, this little company we have, like at They When You Win on Twitter, at They When You Win on Insta, at When They When You Win on Facebook. Like, couldn't be easier to find. There's not a lot of Russ Laraways in the world. That's kind of lucky. So you just search on any of these platforms for my name, and it's usually me. On Twitter, don't get faked. I have a sports burner where I kind of complain about Philadelphia sports. And maybe occasionally engage in politics, but I try not to do that anymore. So don't get tricked into that one. I'm verified on Twitter. My main account's verified, so pretty easy to find.
Cool, Russ. Well, thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for spending time with our sick audience here. I learned a lot more here, and I've learned so much throughout my career. So thank you for all that as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, for thinking of me, for reaching out. It was great to reconnect. You and I were talking before we started recording. This was for me and for my directs. We all have felt like that time in our careers was a special time, and I wrote about how challenging it was in the introduction of the book. We had to kind of make a lot of changes to this group that you and I were a part of, because the way it was run before we bought DoubleClick, we just couldn't continue to run it the same way. We just couldn't. There was no way it was going to work, and it was tough. But most of us look back really fondly on that time, and to reconnect with you and to hear, from someone who, I guess, great grandpas, and to hear you had a good experience and that the leadership culture and our intention around that came through and mattered to you. I got to tell you, man, it's just really gratifying to hear. And so it's been real nice. I really, really appreciate this. I appreciate what you're doing with your life. It's wonderful. It's serving people, and I hope it goes exactly how you want it to go, man. I really hope it goes. I hope it's gangbusters.
Thanks, Russ. And I still got to hit you up for that autograph of your book next time you're in New York or I'm out in Utah.
Yeah, absolutely. Easy. Takes me a minute and a half to write a little note and give you an autograph, blow on it, hand it back. It's easy. So no worries.
Cool, dude.
A very interesting interview with Russ Laraway. Now, even though he stole my first name, I got to give the guy respect. Now, as always, we appreciate you listening to the Sick Podcast. We invite you to connect with us at sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK. Check out any of the past episodes that you may have missed. You'll get something out of every one of them. Alan, what else can they find on the website?
Thanks, Russ. They can also sign up for our newsletter, and the newsletter comes out on a weekly basis, is jam-packed with great tips, insights, and we'll tell you when our next podcast is dropping, with links and also opportunities to join some free events that we'll be hosting soon.
Awesome. Well, we hope you've enjoyed today's episode with Russ Laraway. You're going to love the next one.